Welcome to the inauguration of the Science Seminars of Broward College. We are honored and very happy to have Paul Watson, Captain Paul Watson, conservationist, environmentalist. I wouldn't say that it's the same thing, and also an inspiration for many generations in the protection of the marine environment. I'm pleased to introduce him to my students and also for the community that have the chance and the opportunity to listen and watch him talk with us about the importance of marine conservation. Thank you, Captain.
Thank you. And just a brief introduction, I was the co-founder of the Greenpeace Foundation in 1972, and in 1977 founded the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society, but I was forced out of the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society in 2022 and established the Captain Paul Watson Foundation, which is carrying on the work that I've been doing for, well, the last 50 years. And that work is really to intervene against illegal activities on the high seas and to protect endangered species and endangered ecosystems. This summer, we were engaged in opposing the killing of endangered fin whales in Iceland. And we showed up in June, and within hours of showing up, they called a temporary halt on the killing of the whales until the end of August. But the season's almost over, so we're going to be returning next June to once again confront them. But what I really want to talk about is not about me, but about the state of our oceans. And our oceans are in trouble. In fact, I would say the ocean's in the process of dying. And when the ocean dies, we all die. And what I mean by that is that since 1950, we've seen a 40% diminishment in phytoplankton populations in the sea. 40% diminishment of species, all these species of aquatic plants that provide 70% of the oxygen in the air that we breathe and sequester enormous amounts of CO2. And the reality is this, that if phytoplankton disappears from the sea, we die. We don't live on this planet without phytoplankton. And why is phytoplankton being diminished? And it's because we're diminishing all of those species that provide the nutrient base for the phytoplankton, the nitrogen, the iron, the magnesium, which comes from primarily the feces of aquatic animals, primarily the marine mammals. For instance, one blue whale every day defecates about 3 tons into the ocean, and that is heavily rich with those nutrients that are required by the phytoplankton to flourish. And so phytoplankton is in a lot of trouble, but a lot of species are in trouble. We're going to lose more species of plants and animals between the year 2000 and the year 2065 than we've lost in the last 65 million years. And that's why they call it the Anthropocene, or the 6th major extinction. And for the most part, it's out of sight and out of mind. People don't really think too much about it. I like to look at the Earth as a spaceship. And we're on this incredible voyage around the Milky Way galaxy at incredible speeds. And every spaceship has a life support system. And that life support system provides us with the air we breathe, the food we eat, and regulates climate and temperature. And that system is run by a crew of engineers. And we humans, we're not engineers. We're passengers. We're having a wonderful time amusing ourselves. But what we are doing is we're killing off the engineers, all of those species that keep everything running, everything from the worms, the trees, to the bees, to the fishes, to the whales. And there's only so many engineers you can kill before the machinery begins to fall apart. And that leads to ecological collapse. And that doesn't bode well for our future. I think one of the problems that is the reason for this all happening is our in particular mindset, which I call it, well, everybody calls it anthropocentrism, which means that for the most part, human beings are centered upon themselves. It's all about us. We're the most important species. Everything was created for us, which is rather illogical, but a lot of people believe that. And the fact is that we're simply have to be part of everything else and interdependent with all other species. There are 3 major laws of ecology. The first is the law of diversity, that the strength of an ecosystem is dependent upon diversity within it. The second is the law of interdependence, that all species within an ecosystem are interdependent with each other. And the third is the law of finite resources, that there's a limit to growth, a limit to carrying capacity. And when one species steals the carrying capacity from other species, that causes diminishment in both diversity and interdependence. And that's what is happening right now. I think that the key to our survival is we have to adopt a biocentric point of view, which is something that's familiar to a lot of indigenous cultures around the world. It's something which was pretty much universal prior to the development of agriculture. And what that means is we have to look upon ourselves as being part of everything and not dominant and in control of everything, that all other species are important. Some of them are actually more important than we are. It was a few years ago, I got a call from a reporter from Fox Network, Brett Hughes, I think it was the name. And he said, did you say in a talk that bees, trees, worms, and whales were more important than people? And I said, yes, I said exactly that. And he said, well, how could you say something so outrageous? And I said, what's so outrageous about it? He says, to even say that worms and bees and whales are more important than people is outrageous. I said, well, I said it because it's true. And what I mean by that is that all of these species, they can live here without us. They don't need us, but we need them. So we don't survive without them. We don't live in a world without bees and trees and worms and whales and fishes. And that's the reality of it. And we have to understand that we are equal, and sometimes they're not even as equal as all other species. But this is a planet of citizens of millions of species, all working together to make everything run. And also, we have to look at what is the ocean. When people say what is the ocean, they tend to think, well, it's the sea, but it's more than that. The ocean is a planet. This is actually the planet ocean. And it's water. It's water in continuous circulation. Sometimes it's in the sea, and sometimes it's locked in ice, and sometimes it's underground, and sometimes it's in the atmosphere, and sometimes it's in the cells of every plant and animal on the planet. So that the water is flowing through your body right now was once recently underground or locked in ice or once in the clouds. It's that same water continuously flowing. And so, and it's been going on for millions of years. A glass of water you drink right now was probably once pissed by a dinosaur. It's constantly in circulation. Water is life. And that's what ties all living things together on this planet. And so when you impact one part of the ocean, the air, or it affects the water. If you impact the sea, it impacts the soil, on and on and on. It's all completely linked together. And I think that we really have to take that into account when we look at what we're doing to this planet. We're polluting the ocean with microplastics, and it comes from all sorts of sources that we don't even think about. For instance, a recent study in Norway showed that 40% of the microplastics in the water off their coast came from automobile tires. That is, the cars running down the roads, losing tiny little pieces as it goes, and it gets washed into the ocean. So it's getting to the point where there's going to be more plastic in the ocean than fish, and that's not a very healthy thing. The other problem is our fisheries all over the world are in a state of collapse. And the problem is we have this incredible ability to adapt to diminishment. And what that means is as things become diminished, we just accept it and we move on. The very idea in 1965 that we would be buying water in plastic bottles and paying more for that water than the equivalent amount of gasoline was unthinkable. You would have thought, if I had to propose that, people said that's crazy. Nobody's ever going to do it. But here we are. We've adapted to that. And we're doing the same thing with the fishes. For example, in the 1990s, orange roughy was in all the markets as fish caught off of New Zealand primarily. But it's a fish that takes 45 years to become sexually mature and lives to be at about 200 years of age. It simply could not compete with our demand. And what that means is that it just disappears. And we just forgot about it. We move on to something else. The northern cod fishery collapsed in 1992. It never recovered. Government scientists for the Canadian government said, oh, well, it will come back. But what I've come to understand is that biologists who work for the governments, I don't believe a word they say. I got a word for them. I call them biostitutes, because on the case of the northern cod, as we were warning that the cod fishery collapsed in the 80s, the Canadian government said, our scientists have the best computer models in the world. They know what they're talking about. You are wrong, sir. You don't know what you're talking about. And yet here it happened in 1992. The entire thing collapsed and never recovered. And the same thing's happening to salmon populations on the west coast of Canada, where zoonotic transmission of viruses from salmon farms is decimating populations of indigenous salmon along the coast. And also we have this thing called the economics of extinction. That means there's money to be made from species going extinct. And a good example is bluefin tuna, for instance. As the populations go down, the value of the fish goes up. So the bluefin tuna is now the most valuable fish on the market. Some of them go for an average of $75,000 in Japan. For instance, Mitsubishi has about 10 to 15 years supply of bluefin tuna in their warehouses frozen, and they can continue to supply the market for the next 10 years without having to catch any more fish. But they won't do that, because if they stop the fishing, then the fish populations will begin to come back and rise, and that will lower the price of the commodities that they have in the warehouse. So they're actually investing in extinction. And we're seeing that all over the world with the fisheries. Scarcity translates into higher prices and therefore profit. And we keep going after species which would never have gone after back, say, in the 60s or 70s. I was raised in a fishing village in Eastern Canada, and one of the things we never ate mussels. They were considered dirty, but that's what you get in my hometown now, which is unthinkable back then. Turbots, another fish, which is called a garbage fish in the 60s, but that's the fish you can buy in a New York or Parisian restaurant today, because we've adapted to that diminishment. And I just saw last week that there's a fishery harvesting jellyfish. And I have no idea what for, but they're going after everything they can that can turn a profit in the ocean. And we need to leave it alone. I said when I was speaking at the COP21 conference in Paris in 2015 that if we want to really address climate change, then all we have to do is nothing. And what I mean by that, leave the ocean alone. Don't touch it. We need a 75-year moratorium on mechanized, industrialized fishing operations to allow it to repair the damage that we've done to it over, the last 100 years. And it will replenish. It will come back. The ocean is resilient, but not if it's under constant pressure all the time, which is what it is. It's always under constant pressure from humanity with severe exploitation. So that's where we're at with, we really have to take action. And that means taking courageous action, using your imagination, being passionate about it. Now, when people ask me, well, what can we do? I just say, do what you do best. Use your abilities and your skills to make a difference, and never be deterred by people saying you can't make a difference, because really when it comes right down to it, it's individual initiative, individual passion, imagination, and courage that makes all the difference in the world. I don't count on politicians. Politics is the art of the possible, and no politician is going to make a courageous stand, because they're going to lose votes if they do it, because doing the right thing is not exactly the most popular thing to do. I mean, my job as a conservationist is really to piss people off. I mean, to say things that people don't want to hear, and to do things that people don't want to see being done, and to rock the boat. That's what we do. And but we're just one part of the movement. The strength of an ecosystem is in diversity. The strength of any movement has to be in diversity. So that approach can be litigation, legislation, education, or direct intervention. There's so many ways that it can be dealt with. And when you look at it, sometimes people tell me that it's just an impossible situation. I mean, how do we cope with it? What's happening is just so overwhelming. And how we cope with it is really, when you have an impossible problem, you need to look for the impossible solution. And the impossible solution can be arrived at through courage, passion, and imagination. 1972, the very idea that Nelson Mandela would be president of South Africa was unthinkable. It was impossible, and yet the impossible became the possible. One of the things that I do not ever get involved, that bothers me, is I don't worry about the future. I don't get pessimistic. And I learned that lesson many, many years ago. I was a volunteer medic at Wounded Knee during the occupation of Wounded Knee in 1973 by the American Indian Movement. And we were surrounded, we were being shot at, 46 people were wounded, 2 were killed. And I went to Russell Means, who was the leader of the American Indian Movement at the time, and he was a leader in Wounded Knee. And I said, we don't have any hope of winning. The odds against us are overwhelming. So what are we doing? Why are we continuing to hold out? And he looked at me and he said, we're not concerned about the odds against us. We're not concerned about winning or losing. We're here because this is the right thing to do, the right time to do it, and the right place to be. Don't worry about the future. Focus on the present. The present will define what the future is. We have no power in the future. We have absolute power in the present. So what we do in the present will make all the difference in the world. And that means taking the willingness to take the risks that are needed to be taken to actually accomplish a mission. You know, I get criticized because I asked my crew to, to risk their life to protect a whale. And I won't take anybody on my ship who isn't willing to do that. And when people say, well, how can you ask a young person to risk their life to protect a whale? That's unacceptable. And I don't see it that way. I mean, we ask young people all the time to risk their life for oil wells, flags, real estate, and religion. I think it's a far more noble pursuit to risk your life to protect an endangered species or a threatened habitat. Also, we have to understand that we live in a culture which is primarily a media-dominated culture. Media dictates reality in our culture. It dictates what you read, what you see, how you dress, what you eat is all dictated by media. Media works us over every day. So in the context of a media culture, you have to know how to fight within that culture. And that means understanding media. And every news story, there's only 4 elements to every single news story when you think about it. And those 4 elements are simply sex, scandal, violence, and celebrity. Every single news story has one or more of those elements. And if it doesn't, it's not a story. If you have all 4, you have a super story. I learned this lesson way back in 1977 when I took Brigitte Bardot out to the ice floes off of Newfoundland and Labrador. Her picture cheek to cheek with a baby seal, that guaranteed us the cover of every major magazine in the world. So that's the power of celebrity. A good example of all 4 elements is that in 1985, I led a campaign to protect wolves in northern British Columbia and the Yukon. And we had the people shooting at wolves. They wanted to kill wolves. That's violent. They threatened to shoot us if we intervened. That's violent. We had an environment minister who was taking bribes from a big game hunting organization. Scandal. So I recruited Bo Derek as our spokesperson for the campaign. And at the press conference, a reporter said, "Come on, what does Bo Derek know about wolves? I mean," I said, well, that's not the point. If I had the best wolf biologists in the world, David Meck or Gordon Haber here, nobody would be listening, nobody would be here. But I see the room's full of TV cameras and everybody's watching, and it's going to be the front page cover of your story in the Vancouver Sun tomorrow, and there's nothing you can do about it. And that's because you can control the media if you can control those elements, and that's one of the things that we do. So in 2007, I went to all of the various networks and I said, the biggest show on Discovery right now is a bunch of guys going into a very cold and remote area to catch crabs. And I can give you men and women from all over the world going to a colder, more remote area to save whales. It has to be more compelling than catching crabs every day. And so that began the Whale Wars show, which was the #1 show on Animal Planet for almost 10 years. So again, it shows the power of media. We were able to get the fact that illegal whaling was taking place in Antarctica. Not only were we battling it out with them down there, but we were also educating the entire world to what was happening. In 1977, when I set up Sea Shepherd, I set up a strategy, and that strategy is called aggressive nonviolence. And I've been practicing that for 50 years. And what that means is we're going to aggressively intervene, but we're not going to hurt anybody. And we've never caused a single injury in our entire history. And that's a record that I'm quite proud of and a record that we intend to keep. Now, people will say, well, you're an eco-terrorist. Well, I'm not. I've never worked for Monsanto, but, they're going to call me names. I accept that. And when they started calling us pirates, I said, okay, well, if you want to call us pirates, we'll be pirates. I have no problem with that because historically, pirates got things done and they cut through all the red tape and the bureaucracy and were able to get things done. So, and actually, strange as it is, I'm actually officially a pirate because Judge Alex Kaczynski of the Ninth Circuit Federal Court labeled me a pirate for intervening against illegal Japanese whaling operations in the Southern Ocean. So I've got a bona fide federal judge who has legitimately called me a pirate, even though I was never accused or charged with piracy. So I'm quite proud of that fact that he labeled me. So that's with the Captain Paul Watson Foundation, our activist arm is now called Neptune's Pirates. And we named it that for the specific reason of really just antagonizing people and putting it right in their face, because we're going to get directly involved. Right now, we have people in Mayotte, a little island in the Indian Ocean, confronting poachers at night on the beaches who are trying to kill sea turtles. We're going to be going out in November to oppose the super trawlers off the coast of Ireland and off the coast of France. And recently, we had a major victory in France when we got the French government to stop the gillnet fisheries from killing dolphins. They were killing thousands of dolphins every year. And how we did that again was shows you how to deal with the media. Is that the bodies of the dolphins were washing up in the beaches in Normandy and Brittany, but that was out of sight and out of mind. Only the local people there saw it. So what we did was we took those bodies and we took them to Paris and we put them in front of the Eiffel Tower, on the steps of the National Assembly, or on the steps of the European Parliament, and that got their attention, and that was what ultimately led to the shutting down of the gill fisheries that were killing the dolphins at the time. So these are the kind of imaginative direct action campaigns that we have to do in order to intervene and to make a difference. I just finished publishing a book which came out this month called Hitman for the Kindness Club, and it's a bit of a controversial title, but the reason I called that was because I began to do what I'm doing now when I was 10 years old. That was the year I spent a whole summer swimming with the families of beavers in Eastern Canada. And the next summer when I went back, I couldn't find the beavers anywhere, and they had been taken out by trappers during the winter. And that made me very, very angry. And that winter I began to walk the trap lines and free the animals in the traps and also destroy the traps. So I guess I've been doing the same thing for the last 60 years, really. But the book Hitman for the Kindness Club is a collection of short stories all the way from my childhood up until now. And the reason it's called that is that I was a member of a club called the Kindness Club back when I was 8 years old. And it was set up by Ida Fleming, who was a woman living in New Brunswick in Canada. And after disrupting the Canadian seal hunt in the 70s, I stopped by to visit her. And when I left, she said, you've become the hitman for the Kindness Club. So that's the reason I put the title on there. And everybody seems to kind of like it as provocative. But that's one of the reasons that I was forced out of Sea Shepherd, was because they considered me to be too controversial and too confrontational. But that's what made Sea Shepherd what it was, but they've forgotten that. But here's the problem. Environmental conservation groups, any groups, they tend to get big. And when they get big and get in millions of dollars coming in, then they tend to become very complacent, very mediocre. We don't want to rock the boat anymore. And so I was offered a lot of money just to be a figurehead and say nothing, do nothing, post nothing, write nothing, just to shut up. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And so I left and set up the Captain Paul Watson Foundation, which is going to continue doing the same kind of aggressive, nonviolent operations that I've been doing for all this time. So it's where it's at right now is we have one ship, the John Paul de Joria. We've got another smaller vessel in France called the Walrus. We have another smaller vessel in Scotland called the Vanguard. We're going to be returning to Iceland in June of next year to shut down those illegal whaling operations. Our opposition there is an old man. He's 80 years old, but he's a modern day Captain Ahab, and he's obsessed with killing whales and specifically endangered fin whales. And it's our intention to stop them. In my lifetime, my one lifetime ambition is to eradicate whaling from the planet. And we've done a pretty good job so far. About 90% of whaling operations have been shut down. When I began doing this, they were killing whales in Australia and Chile and Peru and Spain. And over the years, we managed to shut that down. I stopped all of the pirate whaling operations in the Atlantic in 1979 and 1980. We sank half of Spain's whaling fleet in 1980. We sank half of Iceland's whaling fleet in 1986 and shut down their operations for a number of years. Now, you might think that sinking a whaling ship is illegal, and seems that way. But in 86, after sinking half of the Icelandic whaling fleet, I said, what are the charges? What are you going to charge me with? And nobody answered. So I had to fly to Reykjavik and demand to be arrested. And I was met at the airport by numerous police officers and the immigration officer who said, "How long do you intend to stay in Iceland?" I said, "I don't know, 5 days, 5 minutes, 5 years, you tell me." And so we went off to interrogation. They said, "Are you admitting to sinking these ships?" And I said, "Yes, we're going to sink the other two at the first opportunity." And they put me on a plane and sent me home. They didn't charge me with anything. And the Minister of Justice said, "Who does he think he is? He comes into our country and demands to be arrested. Get him out of here." Because they knew that to put me on trial would be to put Iceland on trial for their illegal whaling activities. All commercial whaling is illegal, and it has been illegal since 1986. What Japan has been doing down in the Southern Ocean was illegal. And that's another victory. We drove them out of the Southern Ocean. All whaling today now is restricted to the territorial waters of Norway, Denmark, Iceland, and Japan. And so we're continuing to oppose that. And hopefully my lifetime ambition will be realized and will remove the evil of whaling from the planet altogether. I happen to believe that killing whales is murder. They're highly intelligent, sentient, self-aware beings. And I've had many close, intimate connections with them over the years. And in fact, my life was spared by a whale in 1975, which is one of the reasons that I've dedicated my life to protecting them. And that was in 1975, we had come up with this idea to protect the whales by putting our bodies between the harpoons and the whales. And we were reading a lot of Gandhi at the time. We thought that was going to work. So Robert Hunter and myself were in a small little boat in front of a Soviet harpoon vessel in the Pacific. And in front of us were 8 sperm whales that were fleeing for their life. And every time the harpooner tried to get a shot, I would block the harpoon. And this worked for about 20 minutes until the captain on the Soviet vessel came running down the gangway, and he screamed into the down the catwalk. I mean, he screamed into the ear of the harpooner and then looked down on us, smiled, and brought his finger across his neck like that. And I knew that Gandhi was not going to work for us that day. And a few moments later, there was this incredible explosion, and the harpoon flew over our head and slammed into the back of one of the sperm whales in front of us. It was a female. She screamed, blood everywhere, and suddenly the largest whale in that pod slapped the water with his tail, dove, and swam right underneath of us and threw himself straight at the bow of that Soviet harpoon vessel. And they were ready with an unattached harpoon, pulled the trigger, hit him point blank in the head. He fell back in the water, rolling in agony on the surface, blood everywhere. And as he was rolling about, I caught his eye. And this time I saw a trail of bloody bubbles coming straight towards us real fast. And he came up and out of the water at an angle so that the next movement was to come down and crush us, fall right down on top of us. And as his head rose out of the water, and I looked into this eye that was so close, I could see my own reflection in the eye, I saw something that changed my life forever. And it was understanding. The whale understood what we were trying to do, because I could see the effort he made to pull himself back. His head began to slide back into the sea. His eye disappeared beneath the surface and he died. He could have killed us and chose not to do so. But I also saw something else, pity, not for himself, but for us, that we could take life so merciless, without any compassion at all, without any thought. And why were we doing it? The Soviets didn't eat whales. They killed whales for sperm oil, for spermaceti oil, for lubricating high heat resistant machinery. And one of the things it was most prized for was in the construction, the maintenance of intercontinental ballistic missiles. I said, here we are killing this incredibly beautiful, intelligent, self-aware sentient being for the purpose of making a weapon meant for the mass extermination of human beings. And that's when it struck me. We're insane. We're crazy. And I said at that moment, I'm going to do everything I can to protect them and to protect life in the sea. And that's what my priority is. So in 1986, when we sank half the Icelandic whaling fleet, when I went to the International Whaling Commission after that, I was confronted by a lot of former colleagues from Greenpeace and other groups. And they said, well, just want to let you know that what you did in Iceland was despicable, reprehensible, and you're an embarrassment to the movement. And I said, okay, so fine. And they said, aren't you concerned about what people think of you? No, not really. Didn't sink those whaling ships for you or for any other human being. We sunk them for the whales. Find me a whale that disagreed with what we did that day, and I promise you we won't do it again. So the thing that we do is we operate within the boundaries of practicality, and we operate within the boundaries of the law, which is the reason that I've never been convicted of a felony crime. In 2011, I was actually invited by the FBI to give a lecture. And at the lecture, one of the FBI agents said, well, you know, Sea Shepherd is walking a pretty fine line when it comes to the law. And I said, yes, but does it really matter how fine the line is if you don't actually cross it? And they agreed with us. So we are considered, I guess you could consider us radicals or whatever. I happen to consider ourselves as conservators. There's nothing more conservative than being a conservationist. But you know, this is the path that we've chosen to take, and I think that it's made an incredible difference. We saved 6,500 whales in the Southern Ocean. We've saved thousands and thousands of whales, hundreds of thousands of seals over the years, and interfered with a lot of illegal fishing operations, and have made a very significant impact overall. So this is what we're doing, and we're carrying on. And the Captain Paul Watson Foundation is now in Spain and Italy and Germany, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, the United States. And we've come a long way in the year since we established, from last year until now. And you know, in a way, being ousted from the organization that I created has been somewhat inspiring and motivating. That's sort of like at the age of 72, I get to start all over again and build it up and get back out on the field and get in their faces and rock the boat again. So that's it. I think my time's up right now. Thank you.
All right.
Yep.
Thank you, Captain Watson. And so I have a list of questions I'll order and pose to you in order which they came in. So we have one question that says, what do you plan on doing differently with the Captain Paul Watson Foundation than you did with Sea Shepherd?
I'm not planning on doing anything differently. I haven't changed. Sea Shepherd has. So I'm carrying on doing the strategy of aggressive nonviolence and the confrontations with the illegal operations, illegal whaling, illegal fishing. So I'm just continuing to do what I've been doing for the last 50 years.
All right, thanks. I have one question from what can I do at 16 right now to better help with the oceans and the environment? I volunteer right now in an aquarium and I want to be a marine biologist, but I feel there's more I could do. I'm just not sure what.
Well, when you become 18, you can certainly volunteer to join our crew if you're so inclined. And in the meantime, you can get things like small boat operating tickets or radio operation tickets or medic first aid tickets, whatever. All those things help. But really, everybody needs to find what they're good at, what they want to do. Follow your passion, really. And you can't go wrong there. I mean, because of Diane Fossey, we still have mountain gorillas in Rwanda. Because of David Wingate, we still have storm petrels in Bermuda. I mean, look what Greta Thunberg's been able to do us, you know, when she was 16 years old. So individuals can make a difference if they're passionate and they're courageous and they've got a great imagination.
All right, thank you. Next question is, have you ever experienced aggressive retaliation from a government agencies for the steps like you did in France recently? If yes, what would be your best advice for us when we start to take a more hands-on action like you do?
Well, I've had a lot of confrontations with navies, including the Soviet Navy, the Norwegian Navy, the Portuguese Navy, the Canadian Coast Guard. Back in 1981, we invaded Soviet Siberia. We were the first people since World War II to do that, to get evidence on illegal whaling operations. And I landed on the beach in Siberia. There were 2 Soviet soldiers that were there. And we started filming, and we did so for 45 minutes because they thought we had to be Russians. Who else would be there filming on the beaches? So as we went back to get back in our boat, one of the Soviet soldiers approached and pointed at the boat and said, "Что это? What is that?" And I say, "It's a Zodiac. It's a Zodiac." And they say, "It's a Mercury." And then I realized we were in trouble because it was a Mercury outboard engine. And I pushed the boat out, and I said to the two crew in the boat, I said, "Well, what's he doing?" He said, "Well, he's taking his rifle down." I said, "Smile and wave." And that's what they did. And psychologically that worked. He didn't know what to do. He was confused. We got away. And I got back to the ship, and we're cruising down the coast of Siberia, and a Soviet frigate comes along, and 2 helicopter gunships, they start strafing in front of us. And the Soviet vessel pulls up alongside. It gets on the radio and says, "Sea Shepherd, stop your vessel and prepare to be boarded by the Soviet Union." And I said, "Well, we don't have room for the Soviet Union, so we're not stopping." So what I realized a long time ago is navies don't know how to deal with no. So you have to, just confuse them in that respect. I don't know if you get away with it all the time, but we always have. And but you have to be willing to take on governments and corporations and get in their face. If they're doing something illegal, then you have the moral right to intervene.
Thank you. Can you speak more on the Captain Paul Watson Foundation mission in Iceland for 2024?
We're gearing up right now to return to Iceland. It's a very complicated situation. When we showed up in June this year, within hours of our arrival, they called up the whale hunt. It was a temporary ban until the end of August, but that's pretty much now the season's pretty much over and bad weather is keeping them from going out. But they will, but Christian Lawson, who's the man he's the most wealthiest and most influential man in Iceland, and he's threatened to topple the government over this issue. He wants the Minister of Fisheries and Agriculture fired, and he's demanding a 4-year permit to continue to kill fin whales. And so I'm going to send 3 ships to Iceland next June, and our objective is to make sure he doesn't kill any at all.
All right. Let's see. Have you seen or encountered any activity poachers in like South Florida, Caribbean areas that are to be dealt with?
We have worked in the Caribbean. There was a lot of longlining going on with Taiwanese and Japanese longlining at one point, but we don't get involved with U.S. waters for a very good reason. U.S. enforcement's pretty good. So anti-poaching operations in American waters is actually very, very good. And so we haven't come across many cases. And when there is the Fish and Wildlife or National Marine Fisheries or law enforcement is usually handling it quite well. So so that's not really a concern for us. Mainly our operations are in places on the high seas or in countries that are continuing to kill whales or shark finning off of Central America, for example. But we go where these illegal activities are happening. Oh, and also we go to where they're happening and there's no enforcement.
All right, thank you. What do you think your biggest challenge to overcome this year will be?
Oh, what's the biggest challenge? I think the biggest challenge for everybody is to see what are we going to do about climate change, because it's out of control, and for the most part, governments are just ignoring it, and it's not going to go away. And we're seeing more and more of the effects of that every single day. And I wrote a book 2 years ago called Urgent, and how saving the oceans can address climate change. And I'm hoping that a lot of people will focus on the fact that the ocean is the great regulator and everything, and that we have to, by protecting the ocean, we can help to alleviate the impact of climate change. But unfortunately, it's out of control. Nobody's going to stop burning fossil fuels tomorrow. Nobody's going to stop, having factory farms tomorrow. And until these significant changes are happening, I don't really think that much is going to change for the better. But I do know that young people today are facing a very uncertain future. It's pretty hard to predict what kind of world it's going to be in 2050, 2060, 2075. Fisheries are collapsing. You're seeing natural disasters becoming more and more. So it's a challenge, and I think that it's going to involve every single person. We're not going to have a choice of whether you're going to be involved in trying to protect the environment. You either do it or you die. But basically, the governments are trying to say, shut up and adapt to this diminishment, adapt to the conditions, or we're going to put you in jail. Like in Germany last week, I think they arrested a man who was going to a protest before he stepped out of his house. So they're watching people very carefully. So the biggest threat to right now is climate change activists and animal rights activists, environmentalists.
All right, thank you. Let's see. This question. If you could create a law or a particular regulation, if you could just create one to address the goals to protect and restore, what would it be?
I would like to see an international policing force that upholds international conservation law. We have all the laws, the regulations, the treaties we need. There's just simply no enforcement. it's the Wild West out there, and I guess it needs a sheriff. So we've seen international efforts to mobilize against drug trafficking and other things. We should see the same kind of effort to protect the ocean itself.
All right. Can you talk on the topic of the dumping of the radioactive wastewater from Fukushima, and how do you think that'll interact with your goals?
Well, it's been remarkable how quiet everything about Fukushima has been over the last few years, and now they're dumping radioactive water, and the media is not paying too much attention to it, really. So we've become desensitized to the problem. I mean, logically, it makes no sense. You don't dump radioactive water anywhere in the ocean or anywhere. Shouldn't produce in the first place. But the fact is that I think it's a very irresponsible thing that's happening. But unfortunately, our media tends to be owned by the same corporations that are responsible for the problem. So the problem isn't fake news, as some people say. The problem is no news. That is, things which are intentionally not covered in the news media. Over the last 10 years, over 3,000 environmentalists have been murdered. It's not been in the news, really, unless it's somebody who's a celebrity. You never hear anything about it. Mainly, these are people in Brazil or in Ecuador or places like that who are trying to protect, their ecosystems here and there. But on the same time, nobody's ever been killed by an environmentalist or a conservationist, not one. But I tell you, if we were to ever break somebody's arm, it'd be front page news in a lot of newspapers about all those violent, militant environmentalists. But meanwhile, the murder of environmentalists around the world is completely ignored.
All right. What do you think of aquaculture as a possible solution for some of the issues?
Well, I don't think very much about it, because we've been fighting salmon farms for years now, and salmon farms are a source for zoonotic transmission of viruses to wild salmon populations. They're a source of pollution because of the use of pesticides, various chemicals that are used to tackle salmon lice and parasites and everything, which kill everything within a radius of a mile of these salmon farms. And each of these fish is raised by catching about another 70 or so fish from the ocean to turn into fish meal to feed them. So it's hardly protecting the fish in the ocean. You can only have aquaculture if you have a fish population you can exploit in the wild in order to feed them. And then they're also antibiotically intensive, chemically intensive. It's not a very healthy industry at all, but it makes a lot of money. And that's why you see salmon everywhere now. I mean, salmon is the cheapest fish on the market because of the salmon farms. And one of the things we're particularly incensed about is the fact that salmon farms in the Faroe Islands, that the salmon that they're raising there, the blood from the killing of the pilot whales and the dolphins seeps right through their nets, and the carcasses that are dumped, entire carcasses of pilot whales and dolphins that are dumped on the bottom are rotting beneath in the waters beneath where these salmon farms are. And I don't think people are going to be too happy about that if they become aware about it. But salmon farms are destructive on every level that you can find. What are we doing? Introducing exotic alien species into ecosystems they don't belong. The Atlantic salmon belongs in the Atlantic. It doesn't belong in the Pacific. It doesn't belong in Chile. It doesn't belong in Tasmania. So if I were to introduce piranhas into a lake in Alabama or Mississippi or Florida or something like that, that would be against the law. I'd be arrested. So how can they introduce this incredible predator into waters where it doesn't belong to compete against other species, which are, simply are not as strong or as adaptable as they are?
So one question that we see a lot of young activists facing is, do you have any tips, or how have you found the emotional strength to continue fighting these fights?
Well, that's what I was saying before, just focus on the present. Don't get pessimistic. Don't get depressed. Don't even worry about the future. Your power is in the present. Do everything you can to make this a better world by what you're doing in the present. And by that, I mean using your skills and your abilities the best way you can. you're a teacher, a lawyer, a writer, an engineer, anything. But as long as you're putting your skills and abilities into the service of the planet, I think that makes all the difference.
For someone who's looking to join an organization but maybe not be a right fit for Paul Watson Foundation, or what are other organizations that may dovetail with your goals but might give them another avenue?
I don't know if anybody does what we do, but I think that you can't go wrong by volunteering for local environmental groups and everything. Whether it be protecting wetlands or forests or local endangered species. There's so many opportunities to actually get involved to protect nature, to protect the natural world right in your backyard, really. So you don't have to go that far to find things to actually do. But I mean, with us, we're unique. We're pirates, and we're going to go out there and we're going to confront the opposition, and we're going to do it, I think, in a responsible manner, and that we're not going to hurt anybody, but we are going to shut them down. And I've sunk a number of whaling ships in my career, and gotten into a lot of trouble at the same time. But you have to accept that you're going to get in trouble. You have to sometimes accept you have to go to court and win. I mean, I've been charged many times with many things, and I've actually won in the courts. And for instance, in Newfoundland, I was charged with 3 counts of criminal mischief. I was facing 2 times life plus 10. And my defense was the United Nations World Charter for Nature, which allows for individuals and non-government organizations to intervene to uphold international conservation law. And that was accepted as a defense, and I was acquitted.
All right. Let's see. Do you think that the sort of actions of your foundations are the only meaningful way to improve ocean conservation? Or are there other organizations that you think are also making a significant positive difference? If so, which ones do you think?
Well, absolutely, we're not the only people that are doing anything here. And again, it depends on what your approach is. What is it? Is it a scientific approach, whether it's a litigational approach? There's groups, Center for Biological Diversity. There's the Dolphin Project. People just need to research what it is. What are you interested in? What are you passionate about? And find an organization that's actually is consistent with your goals and your beliefs.
All right, thank you. So how are you doing with you're willing to take a couple more questions, or shall we start wrapping this up in respect for your time?
Whatever you like. It's late at night here in Paris, so I got nothing to do.
All right. What do you consider your most significant achievement in marine conservation?
I think driving the Japanese whaling fleet out of the Southern Ocean. It took us a number of years to do it, but and in the process, we saved about 6,500 whales that they did not kill because we intervened. So I think that's probably the most significant achievement. But also, we took out the market for seal pelts, the Canadian seal pelts, which dropped the quota of the killing of seals from 400,000 down to 40,000. It only exists today because of massive government subsidies, but commercially it's dead. And so that, I think, was also a major achievement.
Right. Someone said they once saw on the news that a cruise ship was present during the pilot whale killings in the Faroe Islands, and a lot of passengers were traumatized. Do you believe that the situations like this will make issues more transparent, or is it not enough?
Well, we were there when that cruise ship was there, and yes, they came in and they drove a pod of pilot whales onto the beach in Tórshavn, the capital of the Faroe Islands, right in front of a cruise ship, and killed them all. And hundreds of cruise ship passengers saw it, and the ambassador line said that they actually called it barbaric. They said they were very upset about it, but they were not so upset that they canceled going their cruises to the Faroe Islands. So they made a big show of it. But there's a lot of money to be made, and sometimes they really just don't care, I suppose. But Disney, by the way, has canceled cruises to the Faroe Islands.
All right. And let's see, trying to sort some of these out for you. Let's see. All right. Well, we're getting close to an hour. So I guess I'll leave the final question as, where can we find more information about the Captain Paul Watson Foundation and be part of a future crew member?
Well, we have a website, which is the Captain Paul Watson Foundation.org. And of course, we can be found on social networks. And also I have my own social networks under my name. And also my books are available from Amazon or directly from our website.
All right. Thank you much. Do you have any last comments or bits of wisdom you want to share before we sign off?
Well, I think we covered everything there, and it was a pleasure talking with you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you much. Professor Serrano, you have any last comments?
No, I think that my students already are familiar with everything that Captain Paul Watson said because they hear me saying similar things in class. My challenge is bringing that concern to people that don't have the access to the ocean. Is the main challenge that I'm seeing. We have access to social media, to YouTube, documentaries. Some of them know whale wars, so they can see that on the screen. It's more difficult to relate that with real life experience. That's been my main challenge, and it will be a question, but I really don't think that there is an easy answer, because in the end, it's passion what you find inside of you. Is passion what I think that I share with Paul Watson, but that's inside of you. So you can try to teach it, you can ask for it, but in the end, either you have it or you don't. I'll keep trying to teach in the same way that he will keep fighting for the conservation of the oceans. So it's not actually a question. I'm happy to having him for my students, because I actually talk similar things in class, and having someone with such experience and such achievements talking to them, it's an honor, and I'm very thankful for that. So if anybody's curious, you can follow him on CaptainPaulWatsonFoundation.net, also on Instagram, because social media, it's in our lives. We are not going to avoid that. But sorry, .org, not .net. But yes, go and check it out about him if you're curious. And if you're in my class, we will talk more about this in the future. Thank you.
All right. Once again, thank you, Captain Watson, for your sharing your time and your wisdom. And thank you.